In the late afternoon of the 19th of April 2020, the crew of the supertanker Caribbean Glory was sent an unusual set of instructions. Their voyage orders, which meticulously detail the instructions for their next route, told them to laden themselves with approximately 200,000 barrels of crude oil and then go nowhere. The next few hours would be the most profitable for the global oil tankers ever. Charter rates for a very large crude carrier like the Caribbean Glory typically run between $40,000 and $80,000 a day. But because of a strange combination of circumstances, for about 72 hours, people across the world were willing to pay more than $300,000 per day in last-minute bids. Now, you might naturally expect that this was because oil prices were unusually high because of unforeseen demand, but it was actually the opposite. On the 20th of April, global crude oil prices went into the negatives. Oil companies were literally paying to give away their liquid gold. The reason was simple, practical economics. On the surface, there was a complex web of financial instruments, macroeconomic factors, and international agreements. You probably even remember this day and the stories that came out about rogue market traders making millions of dollars from the absurdity, but behind the scenes, the reality was shockingly simple. The world only has so much capacity for oil and its refined products. Once it's pumped out of the ground, it fills up this bucket until it's lit on fire somewhere, or turned into hydrocarbon products. In order to maximize profits, there's a big incentive for companies around the world to keep this bucket as small as possible. Excess capacity is more upfront investment, more ongoing maintenance, and less efficient operations. It's a system that just barely works, until it doesn't. The 2020 global pandemic slowed down all the ways that oil was burnt up, but the production side simply couldn't react as fast. The delicate balance was thrown out, and global capacity was at a real risk of overflowing. It's generally frowned upon to dump oil in the ocean, so the people that were holding onto this stuff had three options: outbid everybody else for storage, pay someone to take it off their hands, or hire container ships to hold onto it and sail them around in circles for a few days until things got back to normal. Clearly, this was an exceptional example, but it revealed something about a system that our modern global economy takes for granted. In the oil shipping business, you need to remember one thing above all else: bad news is good news. It's easy to think that oil tankers and cargo ships are effectively in the same business. They both navigate the world's oceans, moving valuable cargo from where it's produced to where it's consumed. They both pull the same kind of shady business practices that totally honestly means their ships operate out of Liberia or Panama, and they even kind of look the same. But that's really where the similarities end. Oil transport, especially crude oil transport, is a fundamentally different business to any other type of shipping. The biggest container shipping companies are completely different from the biggest oil shipping companies, and despite the huge economic benefits to scale, even the largest companies in the oil game have a relatively small slice of the pie. A report conducted by the Congressional Research Service found that the vast majority of oil tankers, including supertankers, were independently owned and operated. Often, these ships have the owner or owners directly commanding the vessel, living aboard it alongside crew. This is radically different from the generational family empires that control the container ship market. Now, exactly how many of these independent vessels there are out there roaming the world's oceans, we have no idea. Privateer fleets are by their very nature private. But there are three major reasons why the global oil shipping fleet has become smaller and more fragmented at the very same time that the container shipping fleet has become larger and more consolidated. First and foremost, oil is just a riskier business. The first thing that most people outside of America think about when they hear Exxon is not the energy company, but rather the Valdez oil spill. On top of being an immensely expensive disaster to clean up, it did genuine lasting reputational damage to the company. In good times, oil tankers run on razor-thin margins, so for a lot of large companies, it just became easier to outsource the work to the lowest bidder. Oil shipping is also different from goods shipping because it's not the cheapest option. The most cost-effective way to move goods over long distances is on container ships. The most cost-effective way to move oil over long distances is through pipelines. Profitable routes between major suppliers and major consumers usually build up pipelines instead of relying on ships. The pipelines are a significant upfront investment, but they pay themselves back with transport costs that are on average 80% lower than even highly efficient bulk carriers. Markets throughout the major economic centers of Europe, Asia, and North America are now comprehensively supplied by oil and gas pipelines, which means ships are only there to pick up the slack around the edges. A few decades ago, this was a very different game. The global oil trade was not as mature, and there was room for larger ships to operate on reliable routes. This is what gave birth to ships like the Knock Nevis, also known as the Sea-Wise Giant. At almost half a kilometer long, it was the largest and longest self-propelled ship in history. Today, its job can just be done more economically by a pipeline, so it was scrapped back in 2010 as a relic of the market that just doesn't exist anymore. And that might give you a hint as to the third reason why the oil trade has become progressively more dominated by smaller independent players. The real money in this industry is no longer made in scale, it's made in flexibility. Operational flexibility, time flexibility, and yes, even some legal flexibility. The rates that ships charge to move oil around isn't actually that closely correlated with oil prices themselves. It depends much more on volatility. If the market for oil is being disrupted by sanctions, wars, trade deals, or destroyed infrastructure, ships can respond quickly where oil pipelines need to be planned years in advance. The more turbulent the global market for oil is, the more money ship operators make. The day prices went negative in 2020 was just one example. A report by Lloyd's found that after it was announced that ships would no longer be attacked when passing through the Red Sea, tanker stocks actually fell because they could no longer charge higher prices. In the oil shipping industry, bad news is good news. Thinking of it another way, the oil market is like pouring a concrete foundation. The levels between suppliers and consumers should be nice and even. Ships are like the trowels. The more uneven the foundation is, the more valuable they become. Now obviously another aspect of the ship's value is what kind of legal grey areas they're willing to operate in. Thanks to sanctions on countries like Iran and Russia, global oil freighters are having some of their best years ever. Ships ignoring these international restrictions can supply markets like China and India and make 3 to 4 times what they normally would for the same trip. Privately operated ships can take on crude oil in Iran for as low as $20 a barrel below market prices. From here, they can make their way down the Strait of Hormuz, along the Indian Ocean and into the Malacca Strait. This is the busiest shipping lane in the world, which lets them pull some fun tricks. They can pull up alongside another non-sanctioned vessel and transfer the oil over to them to be sold without restriction. Amongst all the traffic passing through this narrow channel, such activity is incredibly hard to track, and that's assuming that the local authorities even wanted to. Singapore is also conveniently home to some of the largest oil refineries in the world, and a lot of businesses there stand to make a lot of money by not looking too closely at where their imports come from. If all of that is too difficult, the tanker could just sail directly to the port of Yantai in Shandong, the unofficial hub of the unofficial oil trade. Here, a new industry has popped up called teapot refineries. These are small, off-the-books oil refineries that process undocumented oil and then sell it to local industries at a steep discount. The more restrictions and instability there is in the world, the more lucrative this becomes. Russia's shadow fleet has been well documented, skirting these restrictions, and they aren't even trying too hard to hide it. A lot of buyers simply don't care about the geopolitical events happening halfway across the world from them. If they can get oil at below market prices, they are going to take that opportunity. Now, although they might not like to publicly admit it, even fully legitimate oil shipping companies based out of America and Europe are benefiting from this. As more and more of the world's independent operators move their capacity to serve more lucrative shadow routes, they can demand more from the legal voyages left behind. It also increased the value of their fleets. Most independent grey market oil shippers do not have the money to buy a brand new ship, so they're buying them second-hand. Oil freighters have a typical service life of around 25 years. After that, they're normally sold for scrap to yards in Southwest Asia. Beaches like Alang, which we've already made a video about, usually break down between 25 and 140 oil tankers in a given year as they fall into disrepair. But for the last 4 years, they've been averaging just 7. Ships are not lasting longer, they're just finding new buyers that can keep them just seaworthy enough to cash in on these new routes. This is combining with the boon in new cargo ship production, which means there are less oil tankers being made in the world's yards. All of this adds up to mean that even old rundown freighters have become a very valuable asset, a clear sign of how much money is being made in unstable markets. In their report, even the US government basically admitted that there wasn't much they could do to stop this from happening, because the more they cracked down on trade they didn't approve of, the more lucrative it became. However, there is a higher power that all men of the ocean must answer to, an almighty force that's bigger than laws, conflicts, and morals. That is, of course, insurance. All ocean-going vessels need to be insured, and like all insurance, the higher the risk, the higher the premiums. Old, poorly maintained ships operating along unofficial routes laden with thousands of tons of oil in a conflict-prone area are about as risky as it gets. Nobody wants to do business with an uninsured ship. Traders don't want their oil to be at risk, and ports don't want to be financially responsible for an oil spill. So for a while, this has been one of the last avenues to control this trade. Most marine insurance companies are based in one of 4 locations: London, New York, Omaha, or Zurich. But new providers are emerging from countries like India and Russia to provide this protection and profit where the traditional firms are not allowed to. What remains to be seen is what will happen if there is a major incident in the waters of any country they do not consider friendly. Now, it's fun to speculate, but the lesson here is that in economics, the more restrictions are placed upon something, the more profitable it becomes. The oil shipping industry has had its best years ever because global trade has had some of its worst. Watch this video next to see how mega freighters are dealing with almost exactly the opposite problem. And don't forget to subscribe for more micro stories with big impacts.